exposing the tax havens of the rich and powerful. Can cash-strapped governments make them pay up? I'm Imran Gata, and today's newsmaker is the Paradise Papers. They say nothing is for certain except death and taxes. That is, unless you have a secret offshore account on the Isle of Man. A massive collection of leaked documents out of a Bermuda law firm has once again shed some light on how the uber elite use a complex system of offshore accounts to avoid paying billions of dollars to the government. Among them, the Queen of England, Madonna, and Bono, along with multinational corporations such as Facebook and Apple. Is it illegal? No. But is it right? Well, that's our debate in just a moment. I'll ask if the top 1% has withdrawn from a system that pays for schools and roadways. Have they created what one newspaper calls a mobile republic, where if you have enough money, you don't have to pay as much to the taxman? We begin with this report by Yvette McCullough.
It's the latest leak to lift the veil on a world that normally exists in the shadows. The Paradise Papers expose some of the wheeling and dealing that helps the world's rich elite hide their money and avoid taxes. The Paradise Papers are a trove of 13.4 million leaked documents, detailing 2 offshore service providers and 19 tax havens. The papers reveal that US Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross has interests in a shipping firm which has links to Russian businessmen under US sanctions. But Ross has brushed this off, saying there's nothing improper about it. The papers also shed light on some of the Queen of England's finances, revealing that millions of dollars of Queen Elizabeth II's private estate have been invested in a Cayman Islands fund that's never been disclosed before. And Apple has been accused of shopping around for tax havens, allegedly moving some of its offshore activity from Ireland to Jersey, which has a 0% corporate tax rate for foreign companies. But the tech giant says it's done nothing wrong, and that it pays every cent of the tax that it's required to. Which is perhaps the point. While the Paradise Papers are potentially shocking and raise some serious ethical questions, they show rules being bent and bypassed, but not broken. The fallout from last year's Panama Papers was far-reaching. More than 70 governments launched probes, 13 countries introduced new laws, and the Prime Ministers of Iceland and Pakistan resigned. It also led to a push for more international transparency. The OECD says that between 4 and 10% of global corporate revenues are lost to tax evasion and avoidance, costing the global economy some $10 to $240 billion a year. But it says it's made massive progress in this area in the last year. An automatic exchange of tax data between more than 100 countries came into effect in September. And the OECD says there'll be no significant offshore centres on the G20's blacklist of uncooperative tax havens. Its Secretary-General, Anjul Gurria, says the problems in the Paradise Papers are a legacy issue, and there is now, quite literally, no place for tax avoiders to hide. Many economists blame tax havens for fueling global inequality by helping the rich get richer. But defenders of offshore finance say it's necessary in today's globalised trading world, and the neutrality of havens avoids double taxation, which encourages business and innovation. And as long as people are operating within the law, what's the harm? Are the Paradise Papers just a legacy of a world of dirty finance that's already been cleaned up? Or will this new leak also have a drastic impact on the financial elite who have been named and shamed? Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Berlin, we have Casey Kelso. He's the Advocacy Director at Transparency International, a global anti-corruption organization. And from Paris, TRT World's Editor-at-Large, Craig Kapitas. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Casey, let me begin with you. Has this investigation with the Paradise Papers uncovered anything illegal?
As the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists will say, a lot of these offshore trusts and companies are perfectly legal, but they are abusive of secrecy. So if you want to, they can be used by criminal activities, but for drug running, for sending out guns, or trying to avoid tax in an aggressive manner, which we would say is corrupt. So it's borderline. There's a gray area here that it is legal, but you could say it could be legal abusive behavior of secrecy.
Craig Kapitas, legal abusive behavior of secrecy. Does that accurately define it for you?
I know of no country that has a criminal statute that would indict someone on that charge.
So let me rephrase it, Craig. It's legal, but it's ethically wrong. Would you accept that?
The real tragedy of the Paradise Papers is that they're made tedious by morality and ethics. Morality is the attitude we adopt to people whom we personally dislike. And there's a lot of dislike going on here, in my opinion. Everything that you see in both the Panama Papers and in the Paradise Papers is completely legitimate in the eyes of the sovereign nations in which those corporations have been formalized. If people don't like that, well, they should elect representatives who will get rid of those laws which allow those entities to exist. This is nothing new. These types of operations have been going on since the 1700s. There is no golly gee whiz moment here.
Okay.
This has been well known, and it's been going on for centuries.
Okay, so Casey, the problem is with the laws, not with the people who are just trying to legally pay as little tax as possible. Would you accept that?
No, actually, I think Craig is wrong that this is a new, different level of corruption that happens, or a systemic failure to be able to figure out where are these illicit financial flows going. Now, there's licit financial flows, there's legal deals that are done, and there's a reason why you would have an offshore company. But there's very few reasons for secrecy or these offshore companies when they are used, and it is a common practice, it's the stock and trade in corruption, to have a company that does not disclose who is the person behind it, because you find often in many countries, the airports, the highways, the schools, the large contracts for public expenditures are being awarded to an unknown shell company, which turns out to be the nephew, the son, the brother, or the uncle of a high-level official. That is how corruption works, and that's how it could be stopped then, to say, if you knew, if the public knew that an award of money was being given to a company based in Bermuda, but it's actually owned by the president or the president's son or the family, that's how you stop corruption, is because people then be able to say, this is not right, this is not honest. So that secrecy itself is what allows corruption to occur. Right. It's not untoward to say, if you want to do business as an individual, let the person do a business as an individual and not have the help of a limited liability company that does not disclose who owns it.
Okay, so Craig, isn't the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists performing a valuable service to the world here by showing us exactly where that money is going, and sometimes then individuals, taxpayers and so on, have a right to get angry or not after finding out where that money's gone to?
Oh, absolutely. The consortium is doing a yeoman's job. They're a fantastic group of shoe leather reporters. They should be applauded on every level. But the indignation heaped upon the Paradise Paper culprits right now is in most cases 2% moral, 48% indignation, and 50% envy. I've been covering this type of financial vehicle since 1979. I wrote a book about it. I know the people who set these up. I know why they set them up. And it comes down to one thing, as Tim Cook said in his statement from Apple. And I'm paraphrasing. He said, well, you know, you change the law, we'll comply with the law. So the laws are being complied with here.
Let me come in here,
and for outsiders to try and put their extraterritorial application.
Okay, so let me come in here, right? You mentioned envy. What's wrong with being envious if you're, I guess, you know, a middle-class taxpayer, say in the United States? The best you can do is to go to H&R Block and tell the guy, hey, save me a little bit here or there because taxes are killing me this year. That's the best you can do. And then you don't have the best lawyers, the best accountants that the mega rich have, who employ the dark arts of not tax evasion, but tax avoidance. So they're paying less than they should, while you're still paying as much as you should be, and maybe even more. What's wrong with being envious about that?
Morality is a slippery slope. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with being envious. But let's take this thing inside out for a moment. One of the big voices against offshores is the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. Now, and they do very good work too. But how many people know that the executives and the people who run and work at the OECD here in Paris, who are at the spearhead of trying to wipe this out, they don't have to pay income tax because they work for the OECD. Neither do people at the World Bank and other institutions. And if you call them on the carpet on this inequity, they will chapter and verse cite the same rationales, treaties, and agreements that the people who control the tax havens cite, the tax havens, to say, hey, we're just as valid as everyone else. We're a sovereign entity. We can do what we want. So this is a very slippery slope.
Is it a slippery slope, Casey?
Well, OECD is a good place to start. They have described in their work on base erosion and profit sharing that they've looked at how aggressive tax avoidance or abusive tax denies people in different countries the tax base to be able to have schools or clean water. The United States actually has been one of the leaders in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act enforcement to be able to stop some of these different money laundering that goes through in US dollars or through US banks. Now, what the OECD would like to do at the same sense in their foreign bribery convention is about the same, that companies that go in and bribe money and then create these offshore companies to be able to pay the bribes should be penalized. So it's not a matter of being jealous about yachts or private jets. It's about taxes and who pays for basic public services that people need in developing countries or in my country.
Right, and the United States, whoa. The United States is one of the most efficient and wealthiest offshore tax havens in the world. The states of Delaware, Nevada, I could go through about 37 others. And those states are not going to give up the secrecy rules of incorporating in those states because the OECD or any other international organization or foreign government says so. It's about the extraterritorial application of law. That's what this is really about.
But the United States is...
And that's why it's never going to be solved.
The United States itself has won its
claim. The moment you shut down a tax haven, another one opens up. There's always a loophole.
Casey?
Well, the United States itself has made it sure that it is one of the top enforcers of foreign bribery acts. And in part, that influence has made it the leader against anti-corruption in anti-corruption work. The EU is now looking at the same thing in its money laundering directives, the fourth anti-money laundering directive. In those debates, they're looking at how can you make sure that we know who owns these companies? Because that's at the heart of it is privacy is one thing to make sure that your private affairs of what is to me that does not affect anyone else is my privacy. But under privacy rules and under principles of like human rights, people who are affected by secret companies have to know this. They have to know where their tax dollars going if it's going to be given to a company that's awarded a contract and the contract is owned by a top official who just awarded himself the contract.
Okay.
People have to know that.
Okay.
And journalists have to know that. That's
Craig,
how you get the anti-corruption action to take place.
Okay, Casey, let me bring in Craig here and let me ask him about those who claim that this might just be the tip of the iceberg. Bernie Sanders has said it. Now, there could be an argument to be made that Bernie Sanders is just throwing raw meat at his sort of leftist base here. But he said this is just the tip of the iceberg. Other people have looked at the pattern. They saw the Panama Papers. Now they see the Paradise Papers. Would you perhaps concur that this might be the tip of the iceberg and that this might be far bigger than we could ever imagine?
Well, I think it's the tip of an iceberg that it needs to be chiseled away at here. What the Panama Papers and Paradise Papers did was essentially provide a data dump that is now in the hands of individual reporters around the world to do their forensics on and their shoe leather reporting, and that's what's going on. And if they come up with damaging information, which they may well do, and I'm sure they will, then it's behooving on various governments to trigger whatever criminal statutes they have to go after these people. That's where it stands right now. I don't like inquisitions. They never end well. And what we've seen with both the Panama Papers, which I was involved in, and the Paradise Papers, is a lot of folks getting together in a kind of a mob, not really understanding how offshores operate, what they do. Over the past 25 years, if you go and register at an offshore in, say, Bermuda, the people who are registering that for you know who the principals are. They have due diligences there. Now, those due diligences might not be as tight as, say, the American government or the British government might want to see. But you've got to realize, going back even to the 1960s, if you were a government and you went to Switzerland, for instance, and you said to the government, we think you have a corporation here that's operating in drugs or the illegal sale of weapons, you provided evidence, the Swiss opened up the books. And that was done in virtually every offshore haven except Panama during Noriega.
Craig, would people who want to sanction tax havens after finding out all this information, after the Panama Papers and the Paradise Papers, would they be a part of an inquisition, or is it something that sounds somewhat reasonable?
Well, I think it's reasonable, obviously, for our colleagues to go to dive into this as deeply as they can. But you've got to realize that a lot of these tax havens, like Luxembourg, okay, upwards of 80% of their GDP comes from the creation of these kind of fiscal services. The same thing in Bermuda. Bermuda's tourism is only 15% of GDP. The rest is financial services. There is a global industry here that keeps people employed. A lot of folks might not like it, how it works, but this is how it operates.
Casey, let me ask you about repercussions here. What do you want to happen down the line? We saw with the Panama Papers, maybe not directly, but indirectly, the Panama Papers, for example, even led to the downfall of the Pakistani Prime Minister. What do you want to see happening, Casey, as the months tumble along and people are possibly held to account here?
Exactly. It's if there is wrongdoing, if these, as Global Witness is another organization that calls them the getaway cars for criminals, if they've been used for illegal or corrupt purposes or abusive tax avoidance, then there should be prosecution. So the Panama Papers is a good standard to set. 79 countries. 6,500 different taxpayers who were
tax avoidance. That is not a crime. It's not a crime. Oh, listen, there's so much ignorance on this.
In some jurisdictions, it's a gray area that has to be adjudicated in a court. I'm sorry, Craig, but in a court of law, you can bring it to... Abusive tax avoidance is one way in which, with transfer mispricing and other ways, that a lot of different economies have a capital flight, and there's a lack of ability to be able to develop or create the services and goods that people need in Kenya, Congo, around the world. There's different places where there's a net outflow of resources into different tax shelters or into these fiscal paradise. So sometimes it does end up in court, and that's what we'd like to see. We'd like to see, there was 79 different countries that launched over 150 different investigations after the Panama Papers, and there were convictions. There was like $110 million worth of tax that should have been collected that was then eventually collected. That's what we'd like to see.
Oh, that's a lot
some
of
honesty
money, $110
in a
million.
systemic.
Craig, let me ask you,
Not enough.
as we put a button on this and wrap it up, because I have to move on. Craig, you seem really frustrated that people don't really understand the nature of offshores. So as we wrap up, tell me what you think people misunderstand about offshores.
They immediately think they're illegal, and they immediately think that anyone or any individual or corporation who has one is a criminal. And that is not the case. And in our next installment, we'll go into why people set up offshores and companies set off offshores and the history of offshores. You know, what kind of frustrates me here is a lot of the people complaining about offshores, and there's a lot to complain about. You know, the people who set off offshores, who I know, I talk to these people, I report on these people, they will describe that crowd as a bunch of ideologues who like telling other people what to do with their money. And they don't like that. They will also complain that the governments who get these tax dollars don't know how to effectively spread them around to the people. Now, obviously, that's a matter of contention, but to understand the mind of people who set up offshores, that's where you have to start.
Okay. Craig Kapitas, TRT World's editor-at-large, and Casey. Okay, 20 seconds, Casey, just for a final response. I have to move on.
Just to say, Craig, when you talk to these people, ask them, why are they keeping it secret? Why don't they disclose their name? That's what we'd like. We're not against offshore companies or trusts.
Because
we're
it's
against
legal.
the secrecy. That's the word that you have to use.
Because it's
Why
legal.
is it secret?
Okay, we're out of time. Casey Kelso from
legal.
Transparency International and Craig Kapitas. Thanks so much for joining us, gentlemen. I've got to move on. Still ahead, Saudi Arabia imposes a full blockade on Yemen, while aid agencies say millions of people there are on the brink of starvation. And China's president says he'll lift 43 million people out of poverty. We look at why critics think he should do better. Welcome back to the Newsmakers. Last Saturday, Saudi Arabia intercepted and destroyed a ballistic missile heading towards Riyadh's international airport. Houthi fighters across the border in Yemen say it was a fair target, and in response, the Saudi Crown Prince ordered a full blockade on the country, whose people are already suffering through a war. Aid agencies are livid. The Red Cross says Saudi Arabia is not just blocking weapons from coming in, but keeping food aid from millions on the verge of starvation. Here's Natalie Pohonen, and a warning: some viewers may find some of the images in this report disturbing.
This is a snapshot of Yemen's next generation. Every 10 minutes, a child will die from a preventable disease like diarrhea. 11.3 million children are in need of humanitarian assistance. 7 million Yemenis are on the brink of famine. And now their access to aid from the outside world has been cut off. Saudi Arabia says it sealed Yemen's borders to stop the flow of weapons from Iran to Houthi rebels. It was after the rebels launched a missile at Riyadh's international airport. The UN says the blockade could amount to collective punishment.
If these channels, these lifelines are not kept open, it is catastrophic for people who are already in what we have already labeled the world's worst humanitarian crisis.
On the streets of Sana'a, the effect of closing Yemen's land, air and seaports has been immediate. The price of fuel has shot up by up to 60%. Another reminder that ordinary people are paying for the cost of war.
This is a humanitarian crime. They are exterminating the Yemeni people, and no Muslim should be doing that. These are unjust operations. But it's not unexpected for those who kill children to close some ports.
For more than 2 years, Iranian-supported Houthi rebels have been fighting against government forces backed by a Saudi-led coalition. Both sides have been accused of blocking aid and targeting civilians.
This vision was released by a Houthi-run TV station. It says up to 30 people, including children, were killed in Hajj province in a Saudi-led airstrike this week. This war has forced Yemen's people to endure the unthinkable. Teenager Saida Ahmed Baghili became one of the faces of the ongoing humanitarian crisis. Last year, she was suffering from acute malnutrition, weighing 11 kilograms. Now, thanks to medical aid, she weighs 36 kilograms. Saida is slowly recovering. But will her country be able to do the same if Saudi Arabia continues to cut off a lifeline to outside help? Natalie Pohanen, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined in the studio by Dr. Najib Saeed Ghanem. He's Yemen's former health minister and a member of Al-Islah, an opposition party. Also with us is Kaukab Al-Thaibani. She was a communication specialist at the UN Development Programme. And in Riyadh, we have Saudi political analyst Ahmed Al-Ibrahim. I thank you all for joining us on The Newsmakers. Ahmed, let me begin with you. The Houthis fired that rocket. It went, very close to the airport in Riyadh. That's really bad. It's wrong. And I'm glad it was intercepted. But should all Yemenis have to suffer as a result of this now because of the blockade?
That cliche is really overdue, my friend. I think Saudi Arabia has been trying to restore and have unified Yemen. The war is not definitely against the Yemeni people. The war is for the Yemeni people. Remember, we have 3 million Yemenis living among us. We have Yemenis around us. We have Yemenis everywhere. They share our beliefs. They share our culture. They share our habits. And we are all integrated that we are trying to bring one Yemen. Firing this Volcan 1400 to arrive to Riyadh, and it was smuggled in July by Iran to the Houthis, that's a big sign. That's not a joke,
right,
to be honest with you.
It's not a joke.
We share borders. We
and as I said again,
we cannot be like thousands of miles and we start talking about that.
Okay, and I'm going to repeat it again. That was wrong, right? It was bad. It was an act of war. My question again, I'm not using a cliche here. Saudi Arabia has closed all land and air and seaports. So I'm asking you, what responsibility do the people who are not going to receive aid, such as the aid from the Red Cross, have for that rocket that was fired by the Houthis? What's their responsibility? What's their crime? What have they committed?
It's not a crime. Again, you said half of the sentence and you left the other half alone. It is, we closed all the borders, we closed all the ports. However, if there is any humanitarian ships, planes, name it, anything that contributes to the Yemeni people, they can apply, and the coalition, they gave the procedures on how to do it. And their ships has been granted access, providing that we know where it's coming from, we know what's on the ship, we know where it's heading to. But saying a statement that we're doing a blockade without saying what is the solution the coalition gave, that is wrong.
Okay, so
we are doing
before
so
I bring
much good for
just
the Yemeni.
very
briefly. You should rephrase your
briefly.
question and say what the Houthis have done to the Yemeni people.
Okay, very briefly.
All the medical supplies.
You say medical supplies will come in provided they go through a particular test. So my question then is, did the Red Cross fail the test? Because they say vital medical supplies that are used to treat cholera and get people better and prevent them from gaining cholera, those vital supplies were stopped. The Red Cross, so did the Red Cross fail the test? Is the Red Cross in bed with the Houthis? What's going on?
I'm not going to say all these conspiracies they are in bed with the Houthis. I think the coalition has helped the Red Cross in fighting the cholera disease for almost 99.5%, according to the statistics. So I think it's going very far. But what the coalition is trying to do, the coalition is trying to bring everybody together. We are trying to move the measure. The game has changed. And I think this is the beginning of the end of this militia, and to give back the Yemeni to the legitimate government and have a safe Yemen. And we are actually contributing to Yemen as much as we are probably more contributing to the locals of the Saudi. We're spending so much money on the Yemeni people. We're spending so much money on securing our border. And if Saudi Arabia, my friend, wants to end this war, they can end it with 5 days. But Saudi Arabia, every day with the coalition parties that involved, they meet on roundtable meeting, discuss civilians issues before they fire one bullet into Yemen.
Okay,
because if it's up to Saudi Arabia and they don't care about the people, this is how it's been marketed overseas. You know, Saudi Arabia could have ended in 5 days.
But I want to bring in the others here. Yet 10,000 people have still been killed, more than 3 million displaced, and the UN saying more than 80% of Yemen's 28 million people are in need of some form of emergency aid. With all of that in mind, Najib Ghanim, as a former health minister, the fact that 500,000 children under the age of 5 are severely malnourished, at least 2,135 people have died of cholera in the past 6 months. With all of that in mind, is a blockade the right way to go right now?
Thanks for inviting us. Really, to be honest, really, I agree to a large extent what Mr. Ahmed has said in Riyadh. You have just to remind us about the cause of this scenario. All this agony people are facing, the main reason is the coup. So we have to address the main issue we are now facing. To be honest, King Salman Center in Riyadh have done so many huge efforts, and huge money have been really spent in drugs, in food, and all these things. Most of these have been stolen and resold in the black market by the militias. And about this blockade, yes, I admit that we are not happy to see our people are suffering. They are now suffering much.
But is it worth it?
Really, maybe we cannot just put all these questions as such, but I mean, no, I agree, it's not worth it. But really, to be honest, from the allies and from the, Arab allies and Saudi and all the loyal forces with them, really, they have done so many efforts in favor of strengthening the legitimacy, facing the coup, and also helping people in Yemen. I can't imagine if there is...
But they're not helping right now. There's a blockade. All those stats I've given you show you the terrible humanitarian situation. I'm saying, fine, the Houthis are wrong for firing rockets. They're wrong for a coup. They're wrong. They will be held to account for their crimes. But my question is a blockade the right thing to do when so many people are starving and dying of cholera right now in the country?
I can assure you that for the food and also for the drugs, it's as an open gate for them to reach. If you go now to Sana'a, you will see there is food and also there is some drugs are there in so many places. I mean, so it's not a complete blockade. But I agree with you.
They've announced, the Saudis have announced it as a blockade. That's why we're doing this.
You know, when I say blockade to stop entering these smuggling of weapons from seashores and from
So was
some
it wrong
areas.
to then stop the Red Cross and their shipment of chlorine tablets?
To be honest, I can speak really very frankly. Most of the UN agencies in Yemen are doing their reports and they are biased and they're working in favor of militias.
So is the Red Cross working in favor of the militias?
When you take about these things, you have to also be aware and you have to deal with it and you have to read between the lines and all this.
How does stopping a Red Cross shipment somehow strengthen the Houthis or Iran in supplying rockets to militias?
They have used this Hudaydah shipport to smuggling weapons beside the foods and all these international aids. Most of the international aid is coming from Saudi, coming from Riyadh, and they have been stolen and resold in the black market, and they just ignore about people are dying, people are suffering.
So I'm going to pose that to the Red Cross, and we're going to try and get them on with you. You're in Istanbul, as far as I understand, so we're going to try and do this and follow up on this, because this is an extraordinary claim. Kaukab, you've heard Ahmed, you've heard Najib here. They see the root cause as the Houthis and the Iranians, and they feel that whatever needs to be done needs to get done as soon as possible to end this war. Is that how you see it?
If it's going to be ended, it should be ended by now. It has been 3 years now. And if you're going to do this, it's collective punishment. Because if you impose this blockade on all people, you know who are going to suffer. Now the warlords are operating in full force and the prices get doubled. So people are suffering on the ground. And let's say if they are able to end it in 5 days, and we know how many casualties have happened from the wrong strikes, what happened, there are no intention to end this war by the coalition. We understand their concern, but actually they're not only defending Yemen, they're also defending themselves. We understand, but they also have to know and put in consideration the Yemeni needs. If they do this, they are executing the entire nation.
Ahmed, Kokab used the phrase collective punishment. What do you think?
I think she's wrong. I think she needs to recollect, her facts and see what we can. First of all, Saudi Arabia would like to end the war yesterday rather than today. We cannot take innocent people get killed by the Houthis. We cannot take kids being pushed into mosques and schools and put Stinger's missiles or what have you on the roofs and start, trying to target the coalition planes in order to get it bombed. The mass murders that they do in the territory that Houthis or Abdullah Saleh say, all this is not acceptable for Saudi Arabia. Trust me, we have 3 projects in Saudi Arabia we would like to focus in. It's going to have an economic value to the whole world and to the whole region. We have a lot of things much more important than actually sustaining a war. Being in a war, this is our last option to be handed on. But if we have Iran on our border, we're not going to stay quiet, okay? And very soon, for you and for your audience, Beirut is going to be the first reclaimed capital of the Arab world from Iran to the side of the Arab League and to the GCC. So what we're trying to do with the GCC countries and with our allies in the United States is to cut the Iranian cancer to infiltrate into the GCC countries. We had enough with Iran. We don't send people to Iran to do any kind of terrorist acts. We don't access Iran to their textbook in order to fume them against their own people. We don't do anything what Iran is doing. We are not in a proxy war in Iran except when they came to our border in Yemen. So unless the Houthis get away and they learned the lesson from before that whenever Iran get involved in Baghdad, Baghdad is destroyed, Damascus is destroyed, Hezbollah destroyed Lebanon, everywhere Iran goes, they destroy. It's time for the Yemeni people also on the ground in Sana'a, in Taz, in these places to, come together, help the coalition in order to form and have a united Yemen rather than actually, fighting in the daytime with the Iranian and at the nighttime with different militias. All these facts Saudi Arabia does not like to see. Saudi Arabia would like to have a stable Yemen. Saudi Arabia from the beginning, they could have actually sponsored a group in Yemen and they have the clashes without them and we have a civil war in Iran. But this is not the DNA of the Saudi family. This is not the DNA of the royal family.
Let me bring in
this
the
is
minister.
not the Saudi people.
Okay.
We would like to solve it and we would like to get the cancer Iran from Yemen.
Okay, Najib Ghanim, do you share the same view that this is actually Iran attacking Saudi Arabia and attacking the Yemeni people? Because a lot of people have said, well, this is overblown. Maybe the Iranians give a little bit of help to the Houthis. Maybe the Houthis are sympathetic to Iran, but to see it as Iran directly using the Houthis as a proxy in the region against the Saudis and others is an exaggeration. You see it as absolutely?
Absolutely, I agree, yes. It's a proxy war. Houthis are working in favor of Iran. Iran has got their intention and their objective that you put their hands on the, that vital sea lines, Bab el-Mandab message and also...
But has there been any clear evidence of that? Because there hasn't.
It's a clear-cut evidence about, for example, the Jihan shipment who has been...
The last missile is the biggest evidence.
Have been captured by the legitimate government before the coup. It's Jihan 1 and Jihan 2, full of weapons, full of rockets, full of, all these horrible things, So it's a clear-cut, only some Iran have been killed by the airstrikes, inside Yemen. So many things, So, as I said, you have to revise and remind the viewers about the coup, about the real causes which we are now facing, and now we are come up with the outcomes of the coup, all these agony of these problems.
So when I quote you the 10,000 people killed, because the vast majority of them you would accept killed mainly by coalition strikes, right? This is not me coming up with these figures. These are UN figures.
Just few years before, we have 60,000 soldiers have been killed by Houthis, plus 6,000 civilians have been killed.
And it's complicated. Ali Abdullah Saleh was fighting them, now he's with them. That's complicated, right? People died.
Yeah, but
my point is, when I give you these stats, right, let me rephrase it this way. And this maybe is a bit below the belt. You might be offended by this question, and I do it in order not to just provoke, but maybe to give you an analogy that might be more accurate than you think. When there's a war in Gaza and 1,000 Palestinians are killed, and the Israelis say, we're sorry that 1,000 Palestinians are killed, but ultimately Hamas fired rockets at us first, and they are the cause of this. It's very much the same now, where you're saying, well, the Houthis are the cause, so that 1,000 people that we killed, Hamas caused it. We didn't cause it.
I don't agree with
They
you.
brought it upon the people that they are in charge of right now.
It's a complexity, really. Those in Palestine, they are facing a conquered, and also, Zionists are conquering and also are, colonized their own country. But I mean, in Yemen, Houthis are now, making a real threat for Saudi Arabia in the border, and as a defeater, so in this case, it's a complete story, highly different between one phase in Gaza and the other phase in Yemen.
Okay, let me ask this in a different way. Has the coalition, Hadi's government, backed by the Saudis and the coalition, have they made any mistakes in your eyes, sir?
Huge mistakes.
So, okay, tell me what's the biggest mistake that they made? Is it killing civilians?
No, there are some mistakes in the airstrikes. We admit about it. So we can't say that there's no mistakes. They are human beings and they have so many. It's a war, and this is the price of the war we are going to pay. Our people have paid a heavy price for these previous wars and also emerged and this current war. So it's a mistake is there. Nobody can ignore it. And also on the ground, also we have a weak government. The legitimate government is a weak government. There's so many mistakes. It's not. This time that we can just open all these bitter files. But I said there is no. The propaganda. The propaganda coming from inside Sana'a have misled the international media, and also the thing which is it's can I say it's a bitter harvest that there is so many biased reports made by some of the international organizations working inside Sana'a. They are working in favor. They are working in favor of UNDP, for example. UNDP representative in Sana'a made so many biased reports against Saudi, against allied forces, against the legitimate governments, working totally in favor of the militias, working 100% in favor of the coup. So there are so many bias.
Okay.
The international media have been misled by those, reports coming, part of it between two practices by these UN agencies working inside Sana'a.
Kaukab, what do you want the international community to do?
We want them actually. I agree with the colleagues that that Iran has mingling in Yemen. We understand that, and our problem is with the coup is that they have destructed the civil state that we are about to have the constitution, and we are about to have a civil state that we're going to. But unfortunately, the international community is currently the pattern is to have proxy wars, be it Syria, be it Yemen now, and they are not going to have the battlefield in their lands. So just we need them to understand that if Yemen is not stabilized, if Syria is not stabilized, if the other country is not stabilized, they will not be stabilized as well. Saudi Arabia have supported Houthi before the coup. They have supported the regime before, and now when the danger has knocked their doors, they start to understand. Unfortunately, after 3 years of the war, they have not finished what has been like it should be intended, and it's not now mistakes. The airstrikes are not, we cannot say it's mistakes. And when they say they want us to fight with them, actually they are they haven't helped the Yemeni people and the Yemeni government to support the country. They say they spend money, but people are without salary in the organization, in the areas which are controlled by the Yemeni loyal armies. So if you want really to fight Iran, this is not the way to do it. You have to stabilize Yemen in order to do so.
Who's going to stabilize Yemen?
The international community, they have to...
Led by whom? If for example, the United States is supporting the Saudi-led coalition, so and the UK. I'm just reading today that the UK has actually upped its sort of arms aid to the Saudi-led coalition. So if they're supporting one side and they want one side to win, how are they going to ultimately stabilize the situation?
It's a power game, actually, to be honest. I understand that the US and the international community have the power. They have the media platforms. They have everything. But they don't understand the real needs of the people in the Middle East. So if they continue as such, why the 2011 uprising have come. And if they think this is going to be the first one and the last one, they're wrong. It would continue. And unfortunately, the people are aspiring freedom, they're aspiring good life. And with the globalization era, it's hard to keep half of the, the globe is below development and the other are advanced. It will fire back against them at the end. The conflict will not continue. And they say the terrorist groups are flourishing. It's because they are breeding on these conflicts and on these injustices.
I have to move on, but I think it's important that we had this conversation. Ahmed Al Ibrahim, Najib Ghanim and Kokab Al-Thaibani, I thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers.
People's livelihood has continuously improved. The people-centered philosophy of development has taken roots through implementation of a large number of measures benefiting the people, and people's sense of gains has greatly enhanced. The battle against poverty has made decisive progress, and more than 60 million impoverished people have shaken off poverty.
China's Communist Party came to power promising to end rural poverty. Decades later, President Xi Jinping says he'll make good on that promise by 2020. The challenge? Lift 43 million people out from under the poverty line. In China, that's a man or woman making less than 95 cents a day. And that goal could be within reach. China's poverty rate has halved in the past 5 years. He helped by farming cooperatives, billions of dollars in loans and cash subsidies. But critics say Xi's target is not ambitious enough, arguing that 500 million people don't make enough money for a decent standard of living. Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by Kerry Brown. He's a professor of Chinese studies at King's College, London. Thanks so much for joining us. Kerry, Xi Jinping's made a big promise. He set a 2020 deadline. That's just around the corner. Can he do it?
Well, it depends how he does it. I mean, as you've just said, since 1978, China has lifted enormous numbers of people out of absolute poverty, up to 400 million, according to one analysis, the World Bank. So this is 10% of that, and China is now much wealthier and has greater capacity now. So 2020 is an important date for China. It's the time when it's meant to be achieving middle income status of $13,000 per capita GDP per head. And so having a group of 5% of the population, basically, or a bit under that, 4% of the population who are living in poverty is very embarrassing. So, I'm sure the political will is there, it sounds, and he wouldn't have mentioned it at this Congress last month if he did not feel that there was a realistic chance of doing something about it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of foreigners would go to places like Shanghai or Beijing and be blown away by the prosperity or abundance. But the conventional wisdom is, while that might wow you, that's where most of the wealth is concentrated, in these urban coastal areas, whilst the hinterland is in some places poor, in some places extremely poor. How do they actually solve that riddle and bring prosperity to the middle of China?
So one of the issues really is that the real impoverished areas are in the western region of China. So that is about 400 million people in about 11 provinces, including Tibet, Xinjiang, Gansu, Sichuan. These are huge places. Lack of logistics, so they have tried to build fast trains or train infrastructure. State enterprises rather than very entrepreneurial, although that's also improving. And then, of course, isolated communities. And that's probably the latter is the most difficult, because you've got people in Tibet or in Sichuan or in Yunnan who are living in, kind of places which it would be very expensive to develop them. And the idea really is to have targeted poverty alleviation, targeted programs. China has an enormous amount of knowledge of doing this, so probably very few are better than the Chinese government at doing this kind of targeted relief. But I have to stress, poverty is relative. So you have Beijing, Shanghai, big cities, they look great. There are poor people there too. I mean, they're poor because they are surrounded by people who are much wealthier, and they feel that their lives are not, they're not kind of as they should be. So it gets rid of one type of poverty, absolute poverty. There are other people, though, who are also feeling not like they're winners in this system.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because just like capital, I guess, capitalism, you have the communist system, which is succumbing to some of the flaws of capitalism, where you have inequality, right? So you have tremendously wealthy people. I mean, you have abundance, the economy growing, some people getting extremely wealthy, a lot of people left behind, growing inequality. I wonder, politically, is this more of a priority these days for the Communist Party, given that maybe growing and widening inequality and hundreds of millions of people getting restless and angry at that inequality might cause some cracks in the political system that is really tightly controlled, and they might not have that same buy-in from the population?
Yeah, I mean, Xi Jinping's government have been very aware, as the previous administration under Hu Jintao have been, of the fact that reform and opening up development in the last 40 years has created an enormous amount of wealth and prosperity, but it's been unequally distributed. And so China has more billionaires, probably more dollar billionaires than America, I think, at the moment. It has enormously wealthy people. It has a pretty large middle class, that's for sure. But it still has a lot of people who are disenfranchised. I mean, migrant labourers who don't feel like they've worked very hard, but they haven't got a great deal in terms of social welfare. Pensions that are not being provided to the elderly. So there are left behind communities. There are people in the countryside who feel like they have not been looked after. The very, very poor that we're talking about are a group, but there are plenty of others who might look prosperous but don't feel like they're prosperous, who feel like their future is not so great. There are also retired people whose pensions are not very good. There are people who are living sort of really, really tough lives in cities who, again, on paper might look like they're getting a good, kind of wage every month. But the pressure in China is through rising house costs, rising living costs, rising, everyday commuting costs. Mm-hmm. These are the very similar problems that we have in the West. So, in a sense, this absolute poverty impoverished group is a hold, it's a look back to the old China, and I think that's why they really want to get rid, of this group's problems and address them. But then there's a whole set of new problems that they're going to have to focus on and are trying to focus on.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's been good to get a window into China with you. Professor Kerry Brown, Professor of Chinese Studies at King's College London. Thank you very much for joining us on The Newsmakers. And that's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out our posts on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Do remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, we look at why illegal organ trafficking is a booming business in Lebanon. Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.